May the Force be with you.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in episode 5 of Ahsoka. Can you believe that episode? Man, there was so much fan service in there for Clone Wars and Rebels, but I loved how the episode actually brought Ahsoka through a spiritual journey that actually changed her. She is now Ahsoka the White. I cannot wait to break this episode down for you, explain the weird spirit realm that Ahsoka was in, and talk about how all of this sets up The Force Awakens and ties together so many different eras of Star Wars. But first, I am so excited to finally get to announce something to you guys. We have made these new designs for our merch store that I think you're going to love. So check this out. On ScreenCrushmerch.com today, we launched the new High Ground shirt in honor of Anakin. We also have this beautiful poster or tapestry called Master and Apprentice, showing the lineage of our favorite masters and apprentices.
We're part of a legacy.
And there's my personal favorite, the Just Say No to Death sticks. Go home and rethink your life. We have so much fun designing these shirts for you guys, and if you're able to support our channel by purchasing something from our merch store, we deeply appreciate it. The link is in the description, ScreenCrushmerch.com. So let's talk about this episode. First of all, notice that the map to Peridia's core is composed of these gears, making it feel like this is indeed a very ancient map made from ancient technology. Now, in the first episode, I outlined how the map and the chamber that Ahsoka found resembled the Zeffo temple in the game Fallen Order.
Wait, what's a zeffo? Is that zeffo marks?
No, dude, the Zeffo are an ancient race of Force wielders whose civilization collapsed, basically because of the dark side. So, in the game, you have these levels where you have to move these giant orbs and make parts of the temple light up, similar to what Ahsoka did in the Nightsister temple in episode 1. Now, this temple in the game is also filled with these ancient movable parts, like it's run on gears, making me think that the ancient people who built this map, the people who followed the purgill routes to begin with to Peridia, they might just have been the Zeffo. And, like we have theorized in some past videos, maybe when that Zeffo civilization fell, they actually evolved and became the nightsisters of Dathomir.
Hey person, that's a really cool theory.
Thanks, man. Then Hera lands the ghost on the surface, and geez, I'm still buzzing over getting to see these animated shows in live action. Like seeing the ghost, or like how Chopper's annoying little head bobbles around like it does in Rebels. It's just so cool. They even did this extra work on Hera's Leku, that's her head tails. Notice how they twitch involuntarily. It's little details like this that really bring the galaxy to life. Hu Yang is carrying Sabine's helmet, which I'm sure will be returned to her dramatically at one point as she re-embraces her Mandalorian heritage. But for now, he is just sad robot.
Something always brings me back to you.
The title of this episode is Shadow Warrior, which has a few different meanings. One, obviously, it points to Anakin, who was consumed by the shadow of the dark side when he became Darth Vader. But the title also refers to Ahsoka herself. The challenges she confronts in the spirit realm are as much about confronting her own demons. Ahsoka has lived with trauma and survivor's guilt basically for her entire life. She blames herself for Anakin's fall and blames herself for the fall of the Jedi Order.
Before the end of the Clone Wars, I walked away from him and the Jedi.
So Ahsoka's spiritual experience in this episode was about purging that guilt from her soul. So at the end of this experience, we see her reflection, her shadow self from underneath her, merge into her and they become one.
Yeah, I did not get that whole thing. What the heck was even going on there?
Well, all right. Well, first of all, Doug, you have to understand that...
Oh, just a second, person. Hello? What? I won a $100 gift card to Circuit City where service is state-of-the-art? Oh, that's so exciting!
Hang it up.
But I have won a major prize from Circuit City where service is state-of-the-art.
Buddy, it's a scam robocall. Hang it up.
That's disappointing, but how did they even get my number?
Well, that's actually the really shady part about it, man. They got your number and email from some online data broker. The internet is filled with shady people who pay big money just for access to your private data. You see, I used to get a ton of spam emails and phone calls, but now I never get those calls because I signed up for Incogni. They're the sponsor of this video. Incogni is by far one of the best products we talk about on this channel. This is the app that they don't want you to know about. You guys will be shocked how much of your personal information is just out there on the internet, like your address and your phone number. Incogni found over 100 data brokers that were selling my sensitive information. I mean, we're talking about financial details, health history, internet search history, and they were selling this information to the highest bidder. Several of them were rated 10 out of 10 for data sensitivity, and they were selling information about my potential health risks, my insurance provider, and my credit type. It's really scary stuff.
Or how'd they get your information?
Oh, companies can get your information so easy that it's scary. Like if you sign up for some loyalty card, then these companies sell your data to giant firms called data brokers that then sell your information to other advertisers. But here's the thing, guys, these data brokers have to remove your name from their database if you ask them to. It's the law.
Oh, but I don't have time to contact all those companies and do all that stuff. I'm in a book club.
Right, you may not have the time, but that is where Incogni comes in. They contact those companies for you. You don't have to do anything, and they alert you when the request has been completed. After signing up, I get almost no spam, and I can't even remember the last time I got a phone call from my old friend, unknown number. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. Use my code ScreenCrush with the link below to get 60% off an Incogni plan. It is a great deal that you don't want to miss. Okay, so back to Ahsoka. So I know that most of us are fans of the show Star Wars Rebels, but for those of you who have not watched the show yet, I want to give you a very brief TLDR on this world between worlds. So in the show Rebels, a few months before the events of Star Wars A New Hope, a young Jedi named Ezra Bridger discovers this portal to a place that's
pathway between all time and space. He who controls it controls the universe.
Now when he entered, he heard voices from the prequels,
Train yourself to let go.
and from the original trilogy,
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power.
and the sequel trilogy. So think of this place as like the crossroads of the Force, where all of time and space intersect, like we see in this episode. So then Ezra meets a Force owl called Morai.
Morai? Wait, what's the Force owl called Morai?
Well, as Ezra says,
whenever Ahsoka was around, you were always close by.
so the entrance to the world between worlds was through a mural of 3 Force beings called the Father, the Brother, and the Sister. And these figures appear throughout Jedi lore because, as Sabine explains them,
They're archetypes.
Wait, where's all this come from?
okay, so way back in a series of Clone Wars episodes, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and Anakin actually encountered these 3 literal Force beings. Long, weird story short, the essence of the daughter, the light side of the Force, was brought into Ahsoka. So ever since, the daughter's owl, Morai, follows Ahsoka around.
What about the owl?
A servant of the daughter, or possibly the daughter herself.
Now, it's important for you to know that at the time when Ezra entered the world between worlds, Ahsoka was presumed dead. After the Clone Wars, she had spent years helping to form the rebellion, but then she faced off against Darth Vader at a Sith temple on Malachor. It was actually quite a heartbreaking scene.
I won't leave you. Not this time.
But then, in the world between worlds, Ahsoka's spirit animal led Ezra to this particular portal where he saved her life. Ezra immediately wanted to use another portal to save the life of his master, but Ahsoka warned him that this would basically destroy the universe.
Kanan gave his life so that you could live. If he's taken out of this moment, you all die.
And next, Palpatine tried to enter the realm using this blue flame Force magic, similar to the green flame of Morgan Elsbeth's Nightsister magic. And afterwards, Ezra seals the portal.
Where are we?
The temple.
What? Where?
And I should also note that the last thing Ezra says to Ahsoka is,
When you get back, come and find me!
which of course she's trying to do in this series. And here's a fun tidbit for you. The world between worlds was originally called the Version Scatter, and it was theorized by early Jedi as the Chain Worlds Theorem. It briefly appears in the sacred Jedi text that we see in The Rise of Skywalker. So Anakin appears to her as she last knew him. They actually parted ways in the Clone Wars series just before the events of Revenge of the Sith. Now at that time, Ahsoka had already left the Jedi Order, but she returned for a special off-the-books mission to liberate Mandalore from Darth Maul. And just before this mission is when Anakin gifted her with her 2 white sabers. Now those sabers, by the way, are 2 different lengths, a nod to the traditional samurai style of daisho or big little. Anyways, this is the last time they saw each other.
Anakin. Good luck.
The next time, Anakin was like fully Darth Vader and nearly killed her. But notice here that when we see Anakin, he has Anakin's lightsaber and not Darth Vader's, as some people thought last week. And then he says,
I'm here to finish your training.
because remember, Ahsoka walked away from the Order before she became a full Jedi.
What does that mean?
Alright, so to become a Jedi Knight, every Padawan has to face the trials, like Obi-Wan said.
And I am grateful you think I'm ready to take the trials.
Now, the trial is a personal experience that basically fully enlightens you in the Force. Luke's trial was to defeat Darth Vader, but he had to do that by surrendering to him. And this episode is Ahsoka's trial, where she overcomes her survivor's guilt. And man, like seeing this in live action,
One is never too old to learn, Snips.
it's so cool.
I don't get it. What's Snips?
Snips is the nickname that Anakin called her all through the Clone Wars because, like in the Clone Wars movie, she got snippy with him.
Don't get snippy with me, little one. If we survive this, Snips, you and I are gonna have a talk.
So Anakin draws on her, and after she refuses to fight, he says,
I've heard that before.
because she kind of said this to him before their duel on Malachor.
I won't leave you. Not this time.
Or he could be referencing what his boy told him in Return of the Jedi.
I will not fight you, Father.
Now look, I'm not sure if this is actually Anakin's Force Ghost or not, and really it doesn't matter because this is like a journey for Ahsoka. And it's also pretty cool that the last time Ahsoka was in the World Between Worlds, she was pulled in while escaping Darth Vader. So it's appropriate that the first person she would see when she re-enters is Anakin. Now back in the real world, Jason is able to hear what's happening in the World Between Worlds. Now, as they say in this episode, his dad was the Jedi Kanan Jarrus. Kanan died saving the lives of the other characters on Rebels, and now it appears as if his son is Force sensitive. And I loved Carson's reaction to this explanation.
Jason has abilities. His father, Kanan Jarrus, was a Jedi.
Okay.
Wait, does that mean this little boy died in Luke's Jedi Temple?
Yes, this adorable little boy was killed mercilessly by Kylo Ren.
Oh man, that sucks.
Blame J.J. Abrams, he's the one that killed all the Jedi.
I'm still alive, only I'm very badly burned.
But seriously, I have no idea if he died or not. The point is that Jason can sense what's happening in this other realm. Now I think the reason for that is the World Between Worlds is accessed through portals, and it's likely that the portal on this planet was underwater and Ahsoka just happened to fall through. And then we get a pretty sweet name drop of Anakin's kid.
Senator Organa says she can only give us cover for so long.
So of course they're referencing Leia Organa, the mother of Jason's murderer.
Person, stop that. You're crazy. You're crazy.
We do have fun, don't we? Now, look, I'm not surprised that Leia has gone rogue in order to cover for Hera.
Permission to jump in her next wing and blow something up?
Permission granted.
The novel Bloodline talks about how Leia often bent the rules of politics in the Senate, and that book actually ends with her leaving the government to form an illegal military militia. That's the resistance that we saw in Force Awakens. And then Anakin forces Ahsoka deep down into her own memories, as we begin with one of the first battles of the Clone Wars series. I love the attention to detail here, with the clones wearing the same armor that we saw in Attack of the Clones, and the earliest Clone Wars episodes. Young Ahsoka here is played by Ariana Greenblatt, who was in the Barbie movie and also played young Gamora in Infinity War. Thanks Dig McLuke on Twitter for that one. But what's really cool about this is I think these are the first practical clone armors ever created, because you see in the prequels every single clone on screen was CGI. There's also really cool little details like how Anakin has the short hair that he had at the start of the Clone Wars series, and notice how young Ahsoka still has her Padawan beads. Now all throughout these flashbacks they perfectly matched her headdresses to the different era of the Clone Wars. Very cool. And also later we see Ahsoka for the first time without her headdress, and the makeup blending between her forehead and the Laku look great, but also we see her alien ears for the first time. Now in this flashback we also see numerous High Republic transports and ATTEs as Anakin is wearing the armor that he also wore at the start of the Clone Wars series. Now I think this first battle is the Siege of Ryloth. Now this is the home planet of Hera's people, the Twi'leks, and we see several of them in the background. So the Siege of Ryloth was an epic 3-episode arc in the Clone Wars, and it was just great. It was one of the first extended arcs on the show, and it introduced a character named Cam Syndulla, who just so happens to be Hera's father. Now we never actually saw Anakin and Ahsoka in this ground battle, only on the siege part that happened in space. So this whole sequence fits within the canon perfectly. The clone troopers are all voiced by Tamura Morrison, who played Jango Fett and the clone troopers in the movies before playing a grown-up Boba Fett in The Mandalorian. But I was a little sad that D. Bradley Baker couldn't voice some of these clones, because in the Clone Wars series and the Bad Batch, he does a fantastic job of making every single clone sound unique from each other. A21B medical droid is treating the clones like the one that we first saw in The Empire Strikes Back installing Luke's new hand. So I love this scene because it was a rare moment where we see the Jedi kind of take their breath and take stock of what it means to be fighting in a war. Remember, before the Clone Wars, Mace Windu said,
"We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers."
Kind of echoing what Qui-Gon said in The Phantom Menace.
"And I can only protect you. I can't fight a war for you."
So Ahsoka has spent her entire life training to be a Jedi, a peacekeeper, and now she's a warrior and this bothers her. So she says,
"This isn't what I trained for."
And Anakin agrees in a line that really echoes Mace Windu's.
"When Obi-Wan taught me, we were keepers of the peace."
So let's face it guys, the Jedi were actually destroyed because they chose to lead the clone armies in the Clone Wars. They abandoned the will of the Force in favor of the will of the government, and it's telling that Ahsoka questioned this decision even when she was a Padawan. You can see already that years later she would become a Wayseeker and she would leave the Jedi Order to find her own path. And I loved how Anakin flashes to Vader in this scene. It shows the slippery slope of how the war caused the Jedi to fall. All through the Clone Wars series, we see Anakin make tiny compromises given here and there, kill different people in cold blood.
Who will strike first and brand themselves a cold-blooded killer?
And And when you watch the Clone Wars alongside the prequel trilogy, you can see that all of this was slowly leading up to his fall. But this flash also shows how Ahsoka's memory of Anakin was tainted by his fall to the dark side. And when she says that she won't fight, Anakin replies,
"Then you'll die."
Which is echoing what Vader told Ahsoka in Rebels after she refused to fight.
"Then you will die."
Now back in the real world, Hu Yang, ever the gentleman, finds a polite way to address the man who wiped out the Jedi Order.
What was he like? Intense.
My guess is that Hu Yang actually has no idea that Anakin became Darth Vader. This wasn't common knowledge until like 25 years after Return of the Jedi, when Leia was outed as Vader's daughter by her political enemies. The next flashback is super cool. Now the subtitles identify this clone as Rex, who served with Anakin all through the Clone Wars as part of the 501st, and then he became very close with Ahsoka. The two of them survived the Clone Wars together, and they reunited in Rebels.
You got old.
Had to happen sometime, Rex.
You look old.
Well, that happens.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Now, even without the subtitles, though, you can tell this is Rex. You can see him using his signature dual pistols, very cool. And the ScreenCrush fan on Twitter pointed out that they only designed one helmet for Rex. So in the Ryloth scenes, he has the Phase 2 helmet instead of the Phase 1 helmet. Very cool. This battle, like Ahsoka says, is the Siege of Mandalore. Now, this was part of the final arc of the Clone Wars. Very long story short, Darth Maul conquered Mandalore when he won the Darksaber in combat. Remember, the Darksaber is the special lightsaber that we saw in The Mandalorian. So this made several Mandalorians swear loyalty to him, which is why they all have these horns on their helmets. It's their tribute to Darth Maul. There's even a fun fan theory that the armor on the Mandalorian was a follower of Maul's, which is why she has horns on her helmet and a red chest plate. So this would mean that Din Djarin and Din Grogu are actually part of a Mandalorian clan that started off as a cultist for Darth Maul. So then Ahsoka led a special detachment of clone troopers to Mandalore, and as a tribute to Ahsoka, several clones painted their helmets to mimic her facial markings. And you can see these same clones wearing these markings in this episode. It's also a lot like our Apprentice Lives t-shirt, which is for sale in our merch store. Anakin shows up now with the long hair that he had when the war ended that we saw in Revenge of the Sith. This is when he tells Ahsoka some hard truths that reflect her greatest fears.
Within you will be everything I am.
And when he talks to her about being part of a legacy, you can interpret that to mean that she is part of a legacy of great masters stretching all the way back to Yoda, a lot like our Apprentice family tree poster. Or Anakin could be telling her that she is destined to use the dark side as he has, and then his saber becomes red like Vader's and his eyes turn yellow. And man, I love this scene so much.
You lack conviction.
Notice how that sounds a little bit like Anakin and a little bit like Darth Vader. I think that's because they did a vocal mix between James Earl Jones's voice and Hayden Christensen's, like how they did when Vader's mask broke in Obi-Wan Kenobi.
You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did.
So Lucasfilm bought the rights to digitally recreate James Earl Jones's voice, which is why I think that they mixed it in there. Now, this sequence where they fight was originally rumored to be a reenactment of the Mustafar duel, but instead of Anakin and Obi-Wan, it would be Anakin and Ahsoka battling. I bet they pared it down for budget reasons, or because it would just be too confusing for people. However, Nick Turbide on Twitter pointed out that the way this scene begins is likely a reference to the duel on Mustafar. They're framed the exact same way. And speaking of visual homages, a lot of you on Twitter pointed out that the visual of Anakin crossing his arms and smiling at his apprentice was lifted from this series as well. During the battle, when the red saber is so close to Ahsoka's face that for a second it looks like her eyes have turned yellow as well, reflecting that she also could be on a slippery slope to turning to the dark side.
Why would Ahsoka turn to the dark side?
Well, she basically admits that she tortured Morgan Elsbeth earlier in the season.
How did you get her to tell the truth?
Let's just say I didn't follow standard Jedi protocol.
So after Ahsoka tosses away the red saber, Anakin's good side reasserts itself, which in a way kind of affirms what Ahsoka always thought, that she could have anchored Anakin to the light side of the Force, that if she would have stuck around, he wouldn't have turned. I mean, look, even as Darth Vader, he still didn't want to kill her.
The Emperor will show you mercy if you tell me where the remaining Jedi can be found.
Then Anakin disappears, maybe because he was never really there, as Ahsoka is slowly submerged in water back in the real world.
Yeah, I don't know, man. This whole thing is very weird. I don't understand it.
I know, it's so weird, and I love it. I loved when the Clone Wars would give us these like weird spiritual stories, like the Mortis arc, where Ahsoka and Anakin meet 3 Force gods who like send them visions of different people from their lives. It's all very trippy and laced with more symbolism than a David Lynch movie. So the X-Wings and the Ghost are able to rescue Ahsoka because of Jacen's visions, similar to how Leia's visions guided her to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back. Afterward, Ahsoka is wearing a white blanket that looks like a white robe, because now she is Ahsoka the White. So we actually first saw her wearing this robe in the finale of Rebels just before she and Sabine take off to fight Ezra. That scene is even recreated in this show, but with Ahsoka wearing her normal clothes. Now, I explained in a past video that I think this is because Sabine is narrating at the end of Rebels.
Ezra's out there somewhere, and it's time to bring him home.
Which makes her an unreliable narrator, and maybe as Sabine is telling this story to future generations, she can't remember exactly what Ahsoka wore on that particular day. So now we see that this white cloth has become symbolic of Ahsoka's transformation. She is, like Gandalf the White, now free from her guilt over Anakin's fall. Now, I also personally think this is because of the good spirit of the Sister Force god on Mortis, but my god, that is like going to be explained in a whole other video tomorrow. It's way too complicated for an Easter egg video. So then Ahsoka returns to the shrine and uses the map to find a Force Echo.
What's a Force Echo?
Well, a Force Echo is an ability that you actually use a lot in the games Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. Both Ahsoka and Cal Kestis are able to detect echoes of the past, where they can read objects or even corpses to find out what happened in the past. We saw Ahsoka do this in episode 2, when she learned what happened in the fight between Shin Hati and Sabine. Now, it could also be that Ahsoka can do this with objects that Sabine has touched, because she is more attuned with her apprentice's song and the Force. As they head to the ship, Jacen asks Hu Yang,
"You know how to build a lightsaber?"
Yes.
Which is a fun in-joke for Clone Wars fans, because Hu Yang was the lightsaber builder of the Jedi Order for like thousands of years. In fact, the first time we meet him was when he was helping younglings construct their sabers. And I mentioned this last week, but Jacen wears the same pauldron as his dad, Kanan Jarrus. So the last act of the episode adds in a ticking clock, with the New Republic forces on their way to Reign in Hera. Chancellor Mon Mothma explains to her that the Senate Committee is probably going to take away her dots.
The Senate Oversight Committee is going to determine if your command should be permanently suspended.
Unless Ahsoka testifies. So it's nice that Hera never gave Ahsoka that choice. She sacrificed her career for the greater good.
Wait a minute. A high-ranking military character has to answer for disobeying orders, and there's whales involved? Are they doing Star Trek 4?
Dude, I know, I was thinking the same thing. High five. This is a little bit like the plot to Star Trek 4. So, just a teeny bit of background on these purgill. These are space whales that can travel through hyperspace. And like Hera explained, they inspired humans to try out hyperspace travel.
Old pilot said it was the purgill who inspired us to jump from system to system.
And as we saw in Rebels, they are very attuned to the Force. Ezra uses the Force to communicate with them to teleport himself, Thrawn, and Thrawn's ship to the other galaxy, like Jacen says in this episode.
It's just like the stories you told me. How the whales took Ezra and the bad guys far, far away.
Ahsoka pulls the same trick, using the Force to talk to the whales. I loved this idea because in Star Wars, the Rebels always worked with nature, while the Empire destroyed nature with technology. We saw this, of course, with the Ewoks, but also even the visual of the Rebels on Yavin 4 working from a lush jungle, fighting off an invasion by the Death Star. And the Death Star is an artificial work of nature. It's essentially a fake moon built with technology. Although years later, George Lucas confirmed that the whole thing was a metaphor for Vietnam.
The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists today.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly. So were you thinking of that at the time?
Yes.
And then when they pull up to the whales, they say,
"Up ahead, I think that is one of the larger ones."
Yeah. That'll do.
Which Nick Panev on Twitter reminded us was a lot like this.
I'm going in closer to one of the big ones. That looks pretty good.
And by the way, that eagle-eyed viewer also caught a picture of Kanan on the dashboard of Hera's ship right here. And Marshall Touchton on Twitter also pointed this one out. It looks like Hera was using the same style of Star Wars tricorder that Han used on Hoth when he was looking for Luke. So Hera being on board with using the purgill shows us how far she's come. In the episode where the space whales were introduced, she thought they were just pests.
These creatures are a menace, a big lumbering menace.
It's also really cool that in that episode, she had to learn to fly with the purgill.
Try flying with them instead of against them.
That's not a half bad idea.
Fine.
I think they're calming down.
But now she knows it's just better to follow the purgill migration path. And then the New Republic arrives with their new class of command ships with an Ishi Tib lieutenant on the bridge. We first saw one of these guys way back in Return of the Jedi. And the helmsman is also an alien. Now, it's kind of hard to tell from behind, but I looked it up in this book and I'm pretty sure that it's your mom. So the funniest thing about this episode was the gag where Carson has to explain himself.
Explain the nature of this mission, or I will see to it that you are stripped of your rank for resisting a direct order from Fleet Command.
And then we cut to this.
Correct. The whales will transport her
and her ship, or...
So remember earlier how I said that Luke's trial was to confront Vader, like Yoda said?
You must confront Vader.
But Yoda never said he had to kill Vader, just confront him. What Luke really had to do was to surrender to Vader, to become helpless so Vader's goodness would react and return him to the light. Ahsoka learns a similar lesson in this episode. Instead of trying to control things, trying to control Sabine for example, she has to surrender to the Force. I mean, she talks to the whales and later on admits,
I have no idea.
She just has to enter their mouth and trust in the Force. Now, entering the mouth of a whale or a monster or a great fish has like deep mythological roots. There is of course the story of Jonah in the Bible who was swallowed by a great fish and lived inside for 3 days, and afterwards he became a prophet for God. Similar to how Ahsoka enters a form of enlightenment after the events of this episode. And there's also Pinocchio, who enters the whale monstro with his father, but then dies to save his dad's life, which redeems him of his past sins.
I'm a real boy!
Joseph Campbell talks about the lowest point for a hero being called the belly of the beast, when all appears lost. It's the trash compactor in A New Hope, or even the literal beast from The Empire Strikes Back. But in this show, Ahsoka has learned that she cannot fight the beast, she has to trust it. And SWRPGGM on Twitter pointed out that the last thing Hera says before the jump was the same thing Ezra said before his purgill jump.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Sorry, I meant this.
May the Force be with you.
The Force will be with you. Always.
Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs we found. If you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Harriet.